All right, buckle up, because today we're going old school.
Oh, how old school are we talking?
Well, we're diving into a book from 1919.
Wow, almost 100 years ago.
Yep. It's called The New Black Magic and the Truth About the Ouija Board.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing.
It is, but don't worry, we're not going to start contacting spirits or anything like that.
Right.
This book is actually about a guy who went from being all in on spiritualism to becoming a total skeptic.
Really?
Yeah.
So who is this guy?
His name was J. Godfrey Ropert.
Okay.
And get this, he was actually a member of the British Society for Psychical Research.
So he wasn't just some random critic then.
No, not at all.
He was actually involved in the world of spiritualism.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he was deep in it before he started having second thoughts.
So what changed his mind?
Well, one of the things he really pushed back against was this idea of the new revelation.
New revelation. What does that even mean?
Basically, it was this idea that spiritualism was providing brand new religious insights.
Like a whole new system of belief.
Yeah, kind of like spiritualism was trying to replace Christianity.
Wow, that's a bold claim.
It is, and some big names were buying into it, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
No way Sherlock Holmes is creator.
The one and only.
Huh. You learn something new every day.
But Ropert wasn't having it.
So he thought all this talk of a new revelation was nonsense.
Pretty much.
Did he think all communication with spirits was bogus?
Not necessarily.
That's interesting.
He believed that talking to spirits had been happening throughout history in different cultures and religions.
Okay, so his issue wasn't with spirits themselves, but with this specific claim of a new revelation.
Exactly.
So what was his problem with that then?
Well, he argued that if God is revealing something, it should be timeless, not constantly changing.
Right, like it shouldn't be a new software update every other week.
That's a great way to put it. Ropert basically said that if truth is truly revealed by God, it should be unchanging.
Makes sense.
He even quoted Gilbert Chesterton to make his point.
Really? What did Chesterton say?
Chesterton said, "It's absurd to say you can believe in ghosts in the dark, but not in daylight."
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Ropert used this to argue that spiritualists were changing their beliefs based on the trends of the time rather than on unchanging truths.
So he's saying they were jumping on the latest spiritual bandwagon instead of sticking to solid principles.
Exactly.
I see why this book was controversial.
Yeah, he was definitely shaking things up.
So what specifically about the new revelation did Ropert find so problematic?
Well, one of his biggest issues was that it contradicted some pretty core Christian teachings.
Like what?
Things like the nature of God, sin, and salvation.
Those are pretty big topics.
Yeah, for example, he believed the new revelation kind of downplayed how important Christ's divinity was.
Really? How so?
He felt like spiritualists were more likely to see Jesus as a wise teacher rather than as God.
And that goes against the whole idea of Jesus being both God and man?
Right, and that makes his sacrifice a lot more significant.
Yeah, I could see why that would be a major sticking point.
Ropert basically saw the new revelation as a watered-down version of Christianity.
Interesting analogy.
It's like we were trying to offer a more palatable, maybe even trendy version of Christianity.
But Ropert saw this as a fundamental distortion of Christian belief, right?
Absolutely. He felt like they were missing the whole point of salvation through Christ's sacrifice.
Okay, but wasn't this just an academic debate for him?
Oh no, he actually saw real-world danger in the New Revelation's interpretations of things like sin and the afterlife.
Really? In what way?
Well, spiritualists were more likely to see sin as a learning experience rather than like a transgression against God.
Okay, so a more forgiving view.
Yeah, and they also believed that the afterlife focused on, purification and growth, not like an eternal hell for sinners.
So a more optimistic view of the afterlife.
Exactly.
But Ropert saw this as ignoring some pretty fundamental truths about human nature, right?
Yes, he was really concerned that this feel-good theology would downplay the seriousness of our actions and choices.
So he's saying there need to be consequences for our actions.
Exactly. He believed in personal responsibility and that our choices have real weight both in this life and the next.
That makes sense.
So yeah, he had some major theological disagreements with spiritualism.
That sounds like it.
But here's the thing. He didn't think the phenomena themselves were all fake.
Really? So the seances and automatic writing and stuff like that, He thought those could be real.
He didn't dismiss them outright, no.
That's surprising, given his strong criticism of spiritualism.
It is, but remember, he had a background in psychical research, so he'd seen some strange things.
Okay, so he wasn't saying it was all tricks and illusions.
No, not necessarily.
But he was still skeptical.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So what was his take on these phenomena then?
Well, he was more concerned with who or what was behind them.
Okay, so he wasn't saying it was all fake, but he was questioning the source.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And this is where he introduces the idea of malevolent entities.
Malevolent entities.
Yeah.
Like evil spirits.
Basically. Yeah.
Okay, now we're getting into creepy territory.
A little bit. He basically believed that some of the spirits encountered in spiritualism might not be deceased loved ones, but actually evil spirits disguising themselves.
Oh, wow. That's pretty scary.
It is. And he used the example of Jesus casting out demons as a historical precedent for this kind of caution.
So he's saying that even in the Bible, there's evidence that not all spirits are friendly.
Exactly.
That's a pretty compelling point.
And he went even further.
How so?
He argued that these entities could be incredibly deceptive, even drawing on people's subconscious thoughts and memories to make themselves seem real.
Whoa, so they could be reading our minds and using that information to trick us.
That was his theory.
It's a disturbing thought.
It is, and he even described a personal experience where he encountered a spirit pretending to be his deceased friend.
Really?
Yeah, and he was able to expose the spirit's trickery, revealing its true nature.
Wow, that sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It kind of is. But it highlights his point about the deceptive nature of these entities and how difficult it can be to know who or what you're really dealing with.
So he's saying that we can't just take these spirits at their word.
Exactly. We need to be careful and discerning.
This is definitely making me rethink my stance on Ouija boards.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
So Robert is suggesting that these entities might not be who they claim to be.
Right, and he went even further.
Oh.
What else did he say? He argued that the unseen world operates under its own set of rules and laws,
Mm-hmm.
and that engaging with it without understanding those laws can be really dangerous.
So it's not just about being careful of individual spirits, but about understanding the whole system.
Exactly. He used the analogy of electricity.
Okay.
He said that electricity can be a powerful force for good or bad, depending on how you use it.
Right.
And he argued that the same principle applies to the spiritual realm.
So he's saying that there are certain ways of interacting with the unseen world that are safe and others that are incredibly dangerous.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And this brings us to another one of his critiques of the new revelation.
Okay, what's that?
He felt like it downplayed the concept of hell and eternity. You mean Christianity?
Yes.
That makes sense, given his strong beliefs.
He saw Christianity as offering a more solid and reliable framework for understanding the spiritual realm and avoiding its dangers.
So it's like he was saying, look, I've explored the other side, and trust me, this is the safer route.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's really interesting is that he urged people to think critically about their beliefs and to be wary of blindly following any new revelation.
So even though he was advocating for Christianity, he was still emphasizing the importance of critical thinking.
Absolutely. He wanted people to examine the evidence and make informed choices for themselves.
That's a really important message.
It is, and it's one that's just as relevant today as it was back then.
I agree.
Okay, so we've established that Robert was deeply skeptical of the new revelation and saw it as a distortion of true Christianity.
Right, but what about the specific teachings that he found so objectionable? What were the major points of contention?
Well, one of the most significant areas of disagreement was the new revelation's view of Christ and his sacrifice.
Okay, how so?
Spiritualists, like Doyle, tended to downplay the importance of Christ's divinity, seeing him more as a highly evolved spirit or a moral teacher.
Interesting. So they didn't necessarily see him as God.
No, not in the same way that traditional Christians do.
Okay, so how did that affect their view of his sacrifice?
Well, they rejected the idea that his death was a vicarious sacrifice. You know, the idea that he died to atone for the sins of humanity.
I see.
They saw the idea of one person taking the punishment for everyone else as unjust.
And that's a pretty fundamental difference from the Christian perspective.
It is, and Robert argued that this view completely missed the point of Christ's sacrifice.
So for Robert, the whole point of Christ's death hinged on his divinity.
Exactly.
Because if he wasn't God, then his sacrifice wouldn't hold the same weight.
Right, it would just be another guy dying for a cause.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a major point of contention.
And it wasn't just about Christ either.
Okay, what else?
Robert also took issue with the new revelation's interpretation of sin and its consequences. How so?
Well, spiritualists tended to downplay the idea of original sin.
Right, that whole Adam and Eve thing. So
Exactly.
they didn't see it as this, like, foundational flaw in human nature.
No, they saw sin more as a part of our natural evolution toward perfection.
Okay, so more of a learning experience than a transgression against God.
Exactly.
And how did this affect their view of the afterlife?
Well, for spiritualists, there was no eternal hellfire, just a process of purification and spiritual growth after death.
So a much more optimistic view of things.
Definitely. But Robert argued that this feel-good theology ignored the reality of human nature and the consequences of our choices.
He wasn't buying the everyone gets a trophy approach to spirituality.
Not at all. He believed that the very fact that humans experience guilt and a need for redemption pointed to a deeper spiritual truth.
So he saw the spiritualist view of hell as a dangerous oversimplification.
Yes, he even called it odious and blasphemous. Wow, he didn't hold back.
He felt very strongly about this.
So it sounds like he believed that this downplaying of eternal consequences could have some pretty serious repercussions.
Absolutely. He was concerned about the impact on both individuals and society as a whole.
How so?
Well, he believed that it could undermine personal responsibility and lead to a weakening of moral foundations.
So if there's no fear of punishment, why bother trying to be good?
That's the gist of his argument. He saw it as a slippery slope that could lead to moral decay.
Okay, so we've explored Robert's theological disagreements with the new revelation. He saw it as a dangerous departure from Christianity, promoting a distorted view of Christ, sin, and the afterlife.
Right, but what about the actual phenomena of spiritualism? How did he explain things like seances, automatic writing, and the supposed communication with the dead? Did he simply dismiss it all as trickery?
Not quite.
Really? So
No.
he acknowledged that something was happening.
Yes, he didn't dismiss the phenomena outright.
That's interesting given his skepticism.
It is, but remember, he had a background in psychical research, so he was familiar with these experiences.
Okay, so he wasn't saying it was all fake, just that there was more to the story.
Exactly.
So what was his interpretation of these phenomena? Well, he questioned the source and the interpretation of the phenomena.
Okay, so he wasn't necessarily denying that strange things were happening, but he was questioning what was behind them.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And this is where he introduced the idea of malevolent entities.
So he's basically saying that some of these spirits might not be who they claim to be.
Exactly. He believed that some of them could be evil spirits disguised as something else.
Like angels of light.
Yeah. He even described an experience where he was able to expose a spirit pretending to be his deceased friend, revealing its deceptive nature.
That's pretty creepy.
It is, and it highlights his point about the importance of discernment.
Right. We can't just take these spirits at their word.
Absolutely.
So he's not just concerned about the messages being wrong, he's worried about the messengers themselves.
Exactly. He saw spiritualism as opening a door to the unseen world without any real understanding of what might be lurking on the other side.
That's a scary thought.
It is. He used the analogy of electricity.
Okay.
He said that electricity is a powerful force, but it can be dangerous if you don't know how to handle it.
Right.
And he argued that the same is true of the spiritual realm.
So he's saying that dabbling in the occult without understanding the risks is like playing with fire.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to his critique of the new revelation and its downplaying of hell and eternal consequences.
Right. He saw this as a dangerous oversimplification that appealed to those seeking an easy way out.
Like a spiritual get-out-of-jail-free card.
Essentially.
But Robert believed that true spiritual growth involved confronting the reality of sin and its consequences.
Yes. He saw it as a necessary part of facing our own humanity and taking responsibility for our actions.
Okay, so Robert started out as a believer in spiritualism, but he ended up sounding the alarm about its dangers.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like he was saying, hey, I've been down this road, and it doesn't lead where you think it does.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that he didn't just criticize spiritualism, he offered an alternative.
Right, he pointed people back to Christianity.
Yes, he believed that Christianity offered a more solid and reliable framework for understanding the spiritual realm.
So it's like he was saying, if you're looking for answers, this is where you'll find them.
That's a good way to summarize it.
And he also encouraged people to think critically about their beliefs, regardless of what those beliefs might be.
Absolutely. He was a strong advocate for discernment and careful examination of the evidence.
That's a powerful message, and it's one that resonates even today.
It does, and it's a good reminder that we should always be questioning, always be seeking, and always be open to new information.
Agreed.
So, that's J. Godfrey Robert and his critique of the new revelation.
Wow, that's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's just the beginning.
Oh, there's more.
In the next part, we'll dive deeper into Robert's specific concerns about the dangers of mediumship and the subtle ways these spirits can manipulate our perceptions.
I'm definitely intrigued.
Stay tuned, it's about to get even more interesting.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm really curious to dive deeper into Robert's warnings about the dangers of all this.
Well, he really saw it as a multi-layered problem.
Like what?
One of his biggest concerns was the impact on people's mental and physical health.
Okay, but isn't that a bit extreme? Lots of people try these things and they don't end up in a straitjacket.
Well, he'd seen firsthand how these practices could affect people negatively.
Really?
He described cases of nervous disorders,
Oh, wow.
exhaustion, even insanity in people who were really deep into this stuff.
So it's not just a harmless pastime?
He didn't think so, no.
What did he think was actually causing those problems?
Well, he believed that when you constantly expose yourself to unseen influences without understanding what you're doing, it can really weaken your natural defenses.
So, like, you make yourself spiritually vulnerable.
Exactly. It's like opening your mind up to anything and everything without any kind of filter or protection.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that could be dangerous.
It's like leaving your front door wide open all the time. You never know who's going to wander in.
I get it, but did Robert actually have real-life examples of this harm happening?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like what?
Remember Staten Moses?
The medium.
He was actually held up by spiritualists as this incredible example of mediumship.
But you mentioned he had some pretty disturbing experiences, right?
He did.
So even someone like him, who was supposedly, like, gifted, wasn't immune to the negative effects.
Not at all. And it wasn't just Moses either.
Really?
Robert had all sorts of stories from his investigations and letters from people asking for help after getting mixed up in this stuff.
So he was seeing real suffering because of spiritualist practices.
Absolutely. And he was particularly worried about techniques like automatic writing and using the Ouija board.
Why those specifically?
He saw them as even more dangerous because they encourage mental passivity.
You mean like you're not supposed to think for yourself?
Yeah, kinda. The idea is to just let go, surrender control, and let the spirits do their thing.
But that seems like it would make you even more susceptible to manipulation, right?
That was exactly his point. He believed those techniques weaken your ability to think clearly.
So you become an easy target for these deceptive entities.
Right, and he warned that this could lead to all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Loss of memory, inability to focus, lack of self-control.
And he had real-life examples of this happening.
He did. He described one woman who was doing automatic writing, and the messages started getting really disturbing.
What kind of disturbing?
Obscene stuff, and she started getting physically ill after the sessions.
That's scary.
It is. And he also told a story about a couple who tried automatic writing and received such vulgar messages that they had to stop altogether.
So he's basically saying, don't mess around with this stuff. It can have real consequences.
Exactly. It's not a game. The spiritual realm is real, and it can be dangerous.
So we've got this potential for harm, and we've got these unreliable messages, but there's still that big question.
That's that.
If these spirits aren't our deceased loved ones or good spirits, and they might be demonic, what's their game? Why are they bothering with us at all?
That takes us right to the heart of Robert's worldview and his deepest fears.
So he had an answer to that.
He did, and it's not a comfortable one.
Lay it on me.
He believed their goal was to undermine the Christian faith and steer people away from God.
So it's not just about messing with us for kicks.
No, he saw it as part of a bigger battle, a cosmic struggle between good and evil.
So it's spiritual warfare, then.
Exactly. He believed these entities are working constantly to sabotage God's plan for humanity.
Wow, that's intense.
It is, and he saw spiritualism as a tool for them to achieve that goal.
Okay, so they're using spiritualism as a weapon.
Basically, they're offering these fake answers, these tempting paths, to lead people astray.
And he specifically pointed to the New Revelation teachings as evidence of this, right?
He did. He saw those teachings as twisting the truth about Christ, about sin, about the whole point of Christianity.
So it's like a spiritual bait and switch.
That's a good way to put it. They offer something appealing, but it leads to a very different destination.
And he connected this to the cultural trends of his time.
Right, the rise of materialism, the decline of traditional religion.
Like spiritualism was filling a void.
Exactly. People were looking for meaning and purpose, but he argued they were looking in the wrong place.
So he's saying spiritualism might feel good in the moment, but it's ultimately a dead end.
That's his message, and it's one that a lot of people still resonate with today.
It's definitely food for thought.
It is. It raises those big questions about good and evil, about free will, about the role of suffering in the world.
And it's a good reminder to be careful what you open yourself up to.
Absolutely. The spiritual realm is real and it's powerful, but it's not a playground.
We've got to approach it with respect, with discernment, and with a healthy dose of caution.
I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, I think we need a minute to process all of this.
There's a lot to unpack.
But we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll explore how Robert's warnings might be even more relevant today than they were a century ago.
Stay tuned. It's about to get even more interesting.
All right, so I think we need to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the demon in the room.
You mean the question of whether these entities might actually be demonic?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely the most unsettling aspect of Robert's argument.
And he doesn't shy away from it either.
No, he tackles it head on.
But he does so with a lot of nuance.
He acknowledges that it's a complex issue, one that requires careful consideration.
He's not just throwing out wild accusations.
No, he presents a case based on scripture, tradition, and personal experience.
He even cites other spiritualists who have expressed similar concerns.
Right, like Sir William Barrett, who warned about the potential for delusion, insanity, and all the horrors of obsession.
And Dale Owen, who worried that we might be entering on the first steps of a career of demoniac manifestations.
Those are some pretty chilling words.
It's clear that even some of the most prominent figures in the spiritualist movement were wrestling with this dark side.
So Robert wasn't alone in his concerns.
Not at all, and I think that's important to remember.
Because it suggests that this isn't just some fringe theory, it's something that serious investigators of the spiritual realm were grappling with.
So if we accept the possibility that some of these entities might be demonic, the big question is, why? Why are they doing this? What's their motivation?
Robert believed that their goal was to undermine the Christian faith and lead humanity away from God.
He saw it as a cosmic battle between good and evil, with these entities working tirelessly to sabotage God's plan for humanity.
And he pointed to the teachings of the New Revelation as evidence of this.
He argued that those teachings were designed to distort our understanding of God and his plan for salvation.
So it's not just about random pranks or spooky encounters.
It's about a deliberate and systematic attack on the Christian faith.
And this is where Robert's warnings become even more relevant today.
Because we're seeing a resurgence of interest in the occult and a decline in traditional religious belief.
Exactly. It's like the ground is fertile for these kinds of deceptions.
So Robert's message is a wake-up call.
He's urging us to be discerning, to be cautious, and to be aware of the forces that might be at work behind the scenes.
He's reminding us that there are real stakes involved in our spiritual choices.
And that those choices have implications not just for ourselves, but for society as a whole.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Robert's The New Black Magic and the Truth About the Ouija Board, I think the most important question is, what do we do with all this information? How do we apply it to our lives?
That's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves, but I think Robert offers some valuable guidance.
He encourages us to be skeptical, to question our assumptions, and to test everything against the truth.
He also emphasizes the importance of faith, not just blind faith, but a faith that is grounded in reason and experience.
And he reminds us that we're not alone in this journey.
We have each other, we have our communities, and we have the guidance of those who have gone before us.
So let's take Robert's warnings to heart. Let's be discerning. Let's be cautious. But let's also be open to the mystery and wonder of the spiritual realm.
And most importantly, let's keep seeking, let's keep questioning, and let's never stop striving for a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe around us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about as you navigate your own path.
Until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and stay safe.